what we actually did. Oh, it's got to be me, right? That's right. That's right. I'm looking this. I move to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. All in favor? Aye. That's not what. Okay, public comment period. That's how we do it.
We are by ourselves, no members of the public.
Just a couple housekeeping items really quick. In the green folder, you'll find a press release for Alex Canoe being named small issue of the year for a new bond sale by the bond buyer, national publication. So the press release is on the top. Our plan is to get that out. Tomorrow, the bond buyer issued the second set of documents in your green folder on November 7th, last Thursday, that outlines all of the winners for 2024. We are also enrolled into potentially getting the Deal of the Year award in December. So that's, as one of 10 finalists, we could end up getting the Deal of the Year during the gala on December 3rd. Fair enough.
This is a little wonky because the bond buyer is the Bible of municipal bond industry. So thousands of issuers across the U.S. and the billions of dollars that get issued every year. This is like the Wall Street Journal bond market. This is their one meaningful awards and recognition process. So this is like getting nominated for the Academy. It's the equivalent of this particular industry, so the congratulations and everybody. You say grants today? You have to answer.
Oscar? The third document in your green folder is the annual report pages that cover the financial piece of our annual report. This year, just a reminder, we are beefing up our annual reports. There'll be no after-like after the annual financial report. So these are the financial pages that we've already received comments from Mr. Banks and the Finance and Audit Committee on. So we're providing those to the board for your information and to read through. Mr. Tinkler edits that we got yesterday have been incorporated. We will be bringing a draft annual report to the board meeting next week.
The numbers are all the same, yet it's very embedded. This is not really simplifying. Like, don't you no longer have if they do numbers all over the page here, rather it's down to something that somebody could easily eyeball. And all the percentages, just the bottom line, total percentages rather than all this, including one of those 5-digit percentage of this 5 digits long. It's really.
We'll know that is one way we have to do it. It's like variation.
Okay.
And then before we start the presentation, just want to make sure we do have a relatively new board. If we could just go around the room and do introductions, maybe Brad's starting to feel more back into these open.
Brad Tomlinson, I'm manager with YHP with the external auditors.
I'm Jeff Wolf. I'm with MSL, a shareholder. It's just your consultant to help with the preparation of the ACFR and the audit.
Jason Moore, county manager.
Shawnette Hurley, senior accountant.
Local reading accounting technician.
And with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Akingube to walk through the audit and expert.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Again,
Oh, sorry.
this,
We updated half pages, there are completely revamped slides in the green folders with presentation, Mr. Akingube is going to walk through. But we reference our slides, not the ones that you received in your course. Lot of patience.
okay. Good evening, Mr. Committee Chair, Mr. Board Chair, and members of the board. Today we'll be talking about the FY 2024 audit summary as well as the financial result for fiscal year 2024. Before I do, I would like to acknowledge just some folks. I know we've done some introduction of folks in this room in here, but a lot of effort went into putting the audit and year-end numbers together, and I would like to acknowledge some folks. First, starting with the Alex Renewal Finance team, led by Mr. Jason Moore, who's the accounting manager. For those of you who may not know, Jason used to have a lot of hair on his head. You can see what the audit has done. All right.
Here's the seal thing.
Ms. Shawnette Hurley, who's the senior accountant, as well as Ms. Barbara Reed, who is the accounting technician. We actually currently down the man right now, so a lot of credit to the Alex Review team in putting together a sound clean audit, which I will be talking about as well. I would also like to acknowledge Mr. Jeff Wolf from MSL, who performs some accounting and audit duties on our behalf for us here at Alex Renew. Done an outstanding job again this year. Thank you for your effort. Would like to thank Mr. Brad Townsend, the external auditor, just for the thorough audit they put together. Was really, really helpful. Thank you for your
Not, okay.
help. Today's outline talked about the annual comprehensive financial report, popularly known as the ACFA report. We'll talk about the FY 24 audit results, which would include a briefing from Mr. Brad Thompson later on this evening, as well as the next steps for the fiscal year 2024 ACFA report and audit results. So I know we all hear a lot. ACFA report or annual report, what exactly is that? So the ACFA report is a collection of Alex Renew financial statement that is completed each year in accordance to our financial policy. It is also a tool that we use here as a public entity that promotes sound financial management, create better transparency to our ratepayers, and also show a detailed accountability of how rate and public funds are being used. The report, as you may have seen or read, are broken into three sections. First is the introductory section, as well as the financial section and statistical section. The ACFA is required to be audited by an independent auditor for our financial policy, which is why Mr. Brad Thompson is here tonight to give a review. So this page right here is a summary of the fiscal year 2024 expense and revenue. These are looking at actual numbers. Let me reference this or not. This is not currently talking about actuals to budget, but just actual results. So when we look at this page as a public entity, all of our expenses comes from a funding source. So we have a total expense in FY 24 actual result of 192.1 million. Out of that expense, capital outlay, primarily River Renew, accounts for roughly 75% of total expense. Our operating expense, that's our day-to-day expense to run the plant. That accounts for roughly 17%, while annual debt service to pay our debt accounts for roughly 7%. All those amount again comes to 192.1 million for FY 24. As with expenses, we have to fund those, we have a funding source for, which equates to, again, $192.1 million. A big part of that comes from general capital proceeds, which are pretty much grants and loans that we use to fund our capital projects. And that accounts for roughly 56% of our funding sources. Our operating revenue, these are our user rates that we get from our customer based on the service we provide. That accounts for 35% of our funding sources. And the remaining 8% are from Fairfax capital contributions on joint project, on our capital project. Before I move to the next slide, again, this is not talking actual to budget. I'll get to that slide in a bit. Any questions on a balanced expenditure versus expenses so far? Okay. Slide. This slide right here is the expense infographic, focuses on how the 192.1 million has been spent. Again, we have our operating expense that I talked about in the previous slide, accounting for about 17% of total expenses. And the debt service, right, that you see, that's our annual debt service when we go out and borrow loans. That's how we pay back through our annual debt service, usually over a 30-year period. That accounts roughly, again, for about 7%. The remaining are all our capital projects, inclusive of our IRR project, that's the improvement, renewal, and replacement capital project, as well as our capital project. Those are those numbers in the white circles right there. And those account, again, for roughly about 75% of the total expenses. Out of that $145 million, River Renewal accounts for over 80% of that, 81% precisely. Questions so far?
This is a brilliant presentation of how we spend public funds.
That was Mr. Powers. And this
It
is
really is. It's very, very clear. Where is this, if I'm an average ratepayer or an average resident in Alexandria, where would I see this?
where, in terms of like where we put it on the
Where did
internet,
I put it?
it is on the internet. I could believe we start to share some more info on it.
This is gonna be included as one of the features in the annual report. Yeah, it's
I mean, our mailers don't get the audience that's like papers, but that would be a great thing. to have this. Very clear. Where's the way that our online billing to have stuff? Okay. So great to there on the online bill, this way about getting this. Yeah, we do those stuff as well.
Any other questions? Next slide. So this is similar to a couple of pages back, but now we're looking at our actual results compared to the FY24 budget. In addition to that, not only are we looking actual results, actual to budget, but we're also looking, according to our financial policy, how the flow of funds operate when you're looking at actual to budget. Our flow of funds starts with our revenue, rate payers coming in. And as you can see, we had a total revenue of 68.5 million, which is approximately 2 million better than budget, FY24 budget. That's primarily due to higher actual estimates than what was in our budget. We had an operating expense of 33.2 million, which was almost flat to budget, a little bit over, approximately 200,000. That gives us a transfer, a cash transfer, an operating reserves transfer to debt service and capital of approximately 35.3 million. Again, that is approximately 1.8 million better than budget, primarily from the net operating revenue that we have. Our budget included just some lower estimate than what actually happened. I also wanted to point out, included in our net wastewater revenue is the $1.5 million customer payment refund adjustment that we have. Is showing up on this presentation, but on that line. Okay. So with a transfer of 35.3 million over to cover our debt and some of our capital, we transferred 13.5 million to debt service to cover our annual payment. Another minor funding sources in our debt service is an interest income of roughly about 400,000. A combination of what we transferred from our operating fund into debt service comes to 13.9 million, which covers an expense, 100% expense of $13.9 million. So that's how the debt service was funded. That the overage or the transfer from the operating revenue into the debt service revenue. What's left after that, it goes into the capital to the tune of 21.9 million. Let me back up a bit too. I missed this point. My apologies. On the debt service of $13.9 million. This is approximately 2.6 million better than budget, primarily driven to lower capital spending than planned. That doesn't mean we're not spending on capital, but just slightly lower capital spending due to the timing of when capital project starts and executes. So the total debt service expense was approximately 2.6 million better than reduction to our budget. Again, what's left from the transfer over of 35.3 million after we've taken 13.5 million into debt service is 21.9 million right there to cover some of our capital expenses. A big part of our funding source for our capital expenses, like I said on the previous slide, comes from the parity debt proceeds right there, as you could see, of roughly about 117 million, 106.6 million to be exact. Again, I talked about 2 slides ago, we have Fairfax capital contributions for joint capital projects to the tune of $16 million. Those contributions and those spending, those transfers from those capital Fairfax capital contribution of 16 million was significantly lower than budget. Again, tying back to what I said, due to the timing of capital when a capital project was executed compared to plan. Interest income was significantly higher than budget to the tune of 1.6 million. Again, what's driving that again is with the lower than projected capital spending. We didn't spend as much cash. As a matter of fact, we didn't spend no cash reserves at all. And we anticipated to spend roughly 6.2 million. After all the funding sources from the transfer from operating fund, Fairfax, as well as the debt proceeds, we anticipated on the budget side to spend 6.2 million. Not only did we not spend any cash at all, we also have a cash reserve from primarily again from the operating revenue to the tune of about 11 million that went back into our cash reserve. And what was making that $11 million up again has to do with the better than budget of 1.8 million, the reduced spending in debt service of 2.6 million, as well as the better than budget on our interest income, roughly makes up most of the 11 million that actually went into our cash reserve that we did not spend. So we didn't spend any cash at all. We had, like I said, an excess in the to the tune of 11 million, which we are going to spend that cash. But again, those cash lines up with the execution of capital project, that cash will be used for future capital project. We also factored in those cash when we considering our rate increases every 2 years. So those are things that we'll get at. And Mrs. Fian will be talking a little bit about what our rate projection look like, and it will signal why we currently seeing a slightly lower rate increase. That's not the final number. We're still vetting it, but slightly lower rate increase in FY 26 versus FY 27. Okay, so again, total capital expense, like I said, 2 previous slides ago, was approximately 145 million. River Renewal accounts for about 81% of that, of roughly about 118 million. A big portion of like the funding source for that comes through the debt proceeds, which are mainly loans and grants. They were about 50-50 in FY 24 combination of those. Questions so far? Again, this is now looking at the actual versus the budget. All right. This is 2 of our financial matrix, financial compliance. This is the debt service coverage as well as days cash on hand. What exactly does a debt service coverage ratio mean? As it states right here, this is Alex Renew's ability to meet its debt obligation. So we look at our operating revenue, net operating revenue. That means operating revenue minus your expenses. What's left over, how much of it is left over to cover your debt, how many times? The core financial policy, that target is 1.5. Based on the FY 24, which is even a little bit more conservative, is 2.0, but we actually ended up at 2.5 times. Again, it's a financial metric very similar to like your credit ratings, how they look at certain category. A prime example might be maybe percentage of your on-time payment, if I just to put some content of looking at this compared to that. Another one is what is called days cash on hand. So days cash on hand is another compliance matrix, key matrix that indicates Alex Renew liquidity to manage risk and financial stability for long-range planning. In other words, what exactly does that mean? So that means if we look at the cash we currently have today, without no any other cash coming in the future, okay, that's not the case, but again, we look at the cash we have on hand today, and we look at our operating expenses. How much days can we actually go before we need extra cash or money coming in? The target, 120 days based on our financial policy, and you could see we have 427 days cash on hand. Again, this is not to say although this is a good thing, but this is not just to say we over collecting or holding on like, a lot of money. A lot of this has to do with the reduced capital spending that we've seen in FY 24. Questions so far? Yes, sir.
What's great?
Oh,
The question I'm just having is regarding the capital spending. What is the reason? Is it procurement?
It's mainly River Renew. We're not spending at the same rate as projected in the, in the cash flow. The contractor has a schedule of values. And they're not hitting those payments. So month over month, the payments we're issuing are lower than what we projected in our spending curve. And we use our spending curve we're projecting now for next fiscal year. So we're not always accurate.
Now, as that capital spend though catches up, cash on hand is gonna drop back down to some number less than 4.7.
it should.
Sure.
It should, based on, and that, whatever this number is in the future, a guide to that will be what our financial policy, how conservative, or I'll say, are we to want to go over this 120 days.
The rate model shows now like that you take a dip in FY 27, 28, okay.
Pinch point.
Gets down to close to 120.
Yes. And a lot of it is driven so far right now, just the timing of capital execution. But as we hit our target, that number will dip down. Yes, sir.
I wonder whether there's a way somehow the symbols that are there to mark how much this would be, reserved for capital. It's a way to actually measure that. That's reserved for capital. So somebody saying this doesn't think that, we just got 3 times as much free cash as our policy, but rather that a good chunk of that's reserved for capital projects.
If I understand you correctly, it's just pretty much looking at the cash basis.
The top 4 become blue, the last ones come orange, say orange, and put a little light in it.
Okay,
However,
thank you. Questions so far? Again, this is 2 of our financial matrix that play a big role towards us achieving and maintaining a AAA rating. Next slide. And now we will be talking about the financial audit, and Mr. Brad Thompson will be talking a little bit more about this. Prior to that, I just wanted to highlight just kind of like an overall result of our FY24 audit results. Again, our financial policies requires the ACPA to be audited by an independent auditor. It must follow the generally acceptable auditing standard, popularly known as GAAS. The audit includes a comprehensive examination of Alex Renew's financial statement to ensure accuracy, compliance, and transparency. Why are these things very important? As a public entity, not only promotes sound financial management, but also promotes transparency and enhances public trust. The overall summary results of the FY24 audit outcome, again, we achieved a clean, unmodified audit opinion, both for our single audit as well as our financial audit. Why do we have 2 separate audits? Mr. Brown, I'm not stealing all your thunder, and I know you'll be talking about this some more. The single audit, we are subjected here in Alex Renew to a single audit because of the federal award program and assistance that we've received so far. So anytime an organization receives a federal award of $750,000 or greater, they are required to do a single audit. A single audit is pretty much a compliance program by the federal government to make sure the money that's been awarded to you is being spent accordingly to the program's objective and making sure we're using that money as the program is designed. The other one is the financial audit, which is the regular audit we have annually to make sure all our financial statements are accurately stated, making sure nothing is misrepresented. The goal of any audit, especially in the public sector, again, is to have a clean, unmodified opinion. What that is saying is our financial statements are fairly accurate. They're not misleading to anybody, and they are fairly stated and accurate. As we have, the auditors did not come and find any findings or misleading information about it. So that's always a big achievement. That's always a goal we want to have here at Alex Renew. Just like with most clean audits, there's always recommendations of things we could improve on, do better. The auditors highlighted 2 things. One of them, which has been things they've highlighted over the years, has to do with our account receivable reconciliation. We have some, for lack of a better term, some legacy reconciliation that dates back about 5-6 years outside of the system. They've recommended over the years just to find a way to incorporate that into our system. So we have a system that matches the actual report, and we are working on that in FY24 and 25. It's going to take some working with financial information system consultant to see how we could do that, but we'll agree with it and we're working towards that. We are hopeful to have it hopefully by next year's audit, but we'll give an update to the board as time goes on that if needed. The other one has to do with perform more regular reconciliation of what is called the CFA. And what is the CFA? This has to do with the single audit. The CFA stands for schedule of expenditures of financial award. Again, now that we have our financial award increasing, which includes not only the WIFIA program, but it also includes the ARPA program and a little bit of the LIWAC program from the customer assistance we get. Previous reconciliation process was done annually, but we changed that process even before the auditors came back with the suggestion, like, we need to do this more frequently. And Mr. Jason Moore already incorporated a process to get this reconciled on a monthly basis. That being said, I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions before I hand it over to Mr. Brad Tomlinson to talk a little bit more about the audit results.
Either for you or Brad, the accounts receivable that are very old. So how old are they?
They dates back, and maybe Mr. Brad, you could shed some more light on it, but to my research and what I've done, they dates back to almost 2012. Dates back before the system that we're currently have now. Say that again, sir?
I'm just saying.
I'll hand over to our external auditor, Mr. Brad Thomas.
Current act for an audit on the green folders, they incorporate the basic comments we received. What they were recently. So all comments that we got from on the audit act are incorporated in the green folder first.
Thank you, Lake. This is the document I believe that's in your folder that I'll kind of be flipping through. This includes everything that we issued as part of the audit, so there's a lot of information there. We'll cover the highlights. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look through it beforehand. There's a lot of information to jump in. Some of the questions we can stop and kind of look at them. But as Lake mentioned, my name is Brad. I'm a manager of YHB. I've worked in audit here for a few years. My first time in that, so we appreciate the opportunity to be of service to the board. Congratulations on another successful audit. So, the audit's a very lengthy, time-consuming process on Lake's team and on Jeff's team, too, I'm sure. So, thank you to Lake, Jason, Jeff, for all the help to make it a great process and another clean opinion, like Lake mentioned. So, like I mentioned, just jump in and stop me if you have any questions. The first document that we kind of get to here on page 2, there's page numbers on the bottom right corner to align with the presentation a little bit. The page 2 is the main opinion on the financial statements. So this is going to cover, our opinion on the financial report on the ACFR. And as you'll note there in the second paragraph, like Lake mentioned, it's a clean opinion, an unmodified opinion. So that's the highest level of assurance that we can place on a set of financial statements. There's plenty of information here. Item worth noting is that ultimately the responsibility for the financial statements lies with management. So they're, work with Jeff to prepare them. So they're responsible for the financial statements as well as the internal controls surrounding the organization. Lots of information here is kind of standard. It is noted here as well that on page 3 of the presentation, the required supplementary information is presented with the ACFR. However, we do not audit it. That goes along with the management discussion analysis. So that's, we review it to make sure it's reasonable in context of the audit, but we don't, necessarily go through every single item that's mentioned there. So just 2 kind of disclaimers there. That kind of covers the opinion. So beginning on page 5 is the single audit reporting package, which Lake kind of covered high level. This is the audit, like Lake mentioned, related to compliance over federal awards. So the opinion specifically for that is going to be on page 7. It looks similar to the opinion previously, but this opinion is essentially covering compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. So again, it's a clean opinion. It notes here, potential reporting items that could be listed here would be deficiencies in internal controls. So it notes here material weakness or significant deficiencies. So those are kind of 2 higher levels that would be concerning for a internal control item. There were none of those present in this audit, so that's always good news. There's nothing we noted or nothing that Lake had mentioned our recommendations, they did not rise to those levels there. So that is the government auditing standards opinion. There's another opinion after that, beginning on page 9. This is the opinion on compliance with major federal programs. So as Lake mentioned, there's a few federal programs that you all participate in now. Each year we are kind of required to using the standards to determine which ones are required to be audited. So it's not always the same program. This year it was the ARPA funding, which we'll see in a minute. But again, there's another clean opinion listed here, noting that, Alexandria Renew Enterprises complied in all material respects with the compliance requirements related to the major program. So that's the highest level of opinion you can receive for the single audit. As part of it, we do look at internal controls related to it. However, as noted on page 11, there's no opinion that's given on the internal controls over compliance. So, again, a little bit of an item there that internal controls are ultimately the responsibility of management. Page 12 brings us to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So this is going to list out each of the federal programs that were participated in for 2024. So as you can see, there's 4 programs there, which total about 118 million. There's been a significant increase in federal funding, which you all have received. So that has, resulted in current year, the largest piece there was $65 million was from the ARPA program, which was used for the River Renew project. So that was the program that we audited for the year, which if we keep going, page 13 just has some notes to kind of describe how the schedule is prepared. Note 3 on page 13 does note the outstanding federal award loan balances. So these are just balances that are federal awards that are repayable at some point. So it's just required to be noted there. Page 14 is just a reconciliation that shows how the amount listed on the SEPA are shown in your ACRA. So the amounts do agree between the two. However, it is, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to see exactly where numbers are on the ACRA compared to the SEPA. So this just kind of helps reconcile those balances there. Page 15 is the schedule of findings and questions and costs. So these are the required kind of items that we're supposed to report as part of the compliance audit. The top section there, you can see covers the financial statements. As we mentioned, there were no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies related to your internal controls. The audit report was unmodified, as we discussed, and there was no non-compliance related to financial statements. The second section there, beginning with federal awards, just covers some similar information about the federal award programs. Again, there were no control deficiencies that rose to the level of material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. Another unmodified opinion, no audit findings, which is related to the federal awards, which is always good news. It does identify the major program there, which, like I mentioned, was the ARPA funding, the American Rescue Plan Act wastewater grants. And then you all did qualify as a low risk auditee, which is always makes it a little bit easier. So that kind of covers the single audit. And then as we were doing our inquiries with the board, Mr. Hill did kind of ask a question about how we looked at controls related to capital expenditures and how that kind of played into our audit. So I thought this is a good time to kind of tie that in, because the ARPA funding for the year was pretty much, I think, exclusively used for the River Renew project, which are all capital awards. So as part of that, our testing for the federal awards is a little bit, perhaps maybe a little bit higher level than maybe it's not as granular as perhaps you all would be interested in actually at the project management level, things of that nature. But we verified approximately a third of the invoices that were submitted under ARPA and checked them for levels of review. So generally, there are levels of review at the CEO or COO level, as well as the project manager. So there were no issues with those related to invoices we tested. Like I mentioned, they were all for capital projects. So, if it's something that as the board, you all are kind of, if you're interested in digging in a little bit more to that, it may be something where, management could kind of provide an overview and then of the controls specifically related to capital projects, and then see if there's any questions that you all have. But from our perspective and what we noted with the audit, there was nothing that rose to the level of concern of needing to report that. Our review for this year was obviously tailored towards the ARPA funding, but I believe the controls are probably pretty consistent among the capital projects, whether they're ARPA or not. So that's kind of how our audit related to that. Does that answer the question?
No.
Okay. So and we also test other capital expenditures that are not part of ARPA as part of the financial statement audit, but that testing is more geared towards numbers, financial purposes, not approvals, control.
You mentioned you looked at a third of the invoices, were those the first third, whole third, or just random?
They're haphazard, so not perfectly random, but they're kind of mixed in. We tried to pick, I think we picked a variety of vendors. I believe there's 3 or so vendors maybe that were flowing through the ARPA funding, so we picked some of each. So we tried to mix them around, so they were.
Representative.
Yes, yes, they were. Mhm. Any questions on anything so far? Okay. So on page 16, this is another required opinion that we have to issue. This is to comply with the Virginia Auditor of Public Accounts, which requires us to test various VRS retirement participant census data to make sure that the information that's sent to VRS is accurate. So this opinion here is just noting that there were no issues related to that required, any sort of reports. The page after is just their required formatting to show kind of what we tested related to VRS. So that document there is just for VRS purposes and gets used by them. The next item we come to on page 18 is going to be the allocation of their expenses with Fairfax County. So this report here, again, there's another opinion. So we've had lost track of probably 5 or 6 opinions so far, it seems like. But another clean opinion, so that's always good news. It's noted there again that management is ultimately responsible for preparing the schedule and allocations. But again, nothing to report in the opinion. The actual allocation is done on page 21, and so this just kind of shows the expenses that were incurred, which portion is the expense versus allocation only, and then the payment received from Fairfax based on the projection in the year, and then ultimately comes down to the reconciliation showing that Fairfax will be reimbursed about $716,000 due to the calculation, just how the usage ended up being versus the projected amount. So that amount is included in the ACFR. It's already been accrued there. So this is just kind of a support calculation before it's being used by them.
Before we move off this one, we could drill down this. And for a moment, I'm skeptical. I'm not, but 10, I'm skeptical about that portion. How do you assure us? How do you assure us that it's the right proportion?
So like, I mean, do you want to speak a little bit to what goes into the calculation perhaps and how?
So we have a model that was designed, a financial model that ties into this. It primarily is based on flows as well as a portion of our operating expense. When I'm in a portion of our operating expense, meaning what's considered joint expense versus what's considered Alex only expense. One of the main reasons, this is where you're going with it, why we've been reimbursing or owing money back to Fairfax is at the budget level at the beginning of the year, when the budget was created, we anticipate higher flows from Fairfax, but what we've actually been seeing are lower flows than estimated. It's about.
Yeah, are you asking about the float?
Actually, everything.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's go at the very beginning. How do we calculate
based on meters.
Okay.
We have meters that come into the plant. Fairfax has meters at the boundary of the city. Those meters tell us how much flow are out versus Fairfax.
Okay.
And then the ones that aren't metered, the unmetered properties coming in via other sewers, we go back and we download water records for the Fairfax properties and Alexandria properties that are unmetered, use the billing records to go back and then do a true up every quarter on flow. So the monthly flow report, the quarterly true up. And yes, if you look at Fairfax's numbers, 41%. They have 60% control of the plant, so they're well under delivering.
So we're very, very comfortable about those flow numbers.
I wish the process was cleaner, but you can't
pipes.
You can't meter all the individual, customers, so,
But you have to buy a year price. Because
we've seen a downward trend in Fairfax flows over the last 5 years. So ever since Noma Coal was completed, we've seen a downward trend. So I'm not sure if they're deciding to send flows where it's cheaper to treat versus us, I'm not sure.
Yes, see.
Okay, so we have a nice engineering basis. For 40 X%.
Yeah, it's 40.95.
But that's good stuff.
How do we know that this piece of equipment that we're buying,
X% of it's for Fairfax, and Y% for us.
Which job do you want to pick? First again, the rich bandit?
Yeah, take a look at that.
This is not some complicated.
Yeah, what are you doing?
What's all I said in Riverdale? You know, Riverdale is a cost share. And each component in Riverdale is broken down into one of 4 cost categories. There's like a 2674 category, there's a 60/40 category. There's like another category and then an alternate category. So we got 4 categories for finding Riverdale. Our entire schedule values from the contractor is set up into those billing categories. So when they buy a piece of equipment, like comes back through, up through finance, up to Caitlin for approval, it's billed to one of those categories. And the accountants double check it before we issue payment to the contractor. Sometimes they get it wrong and kick it back and say, hey, this is the wrong category. But it's set up from the get-go of the job. We have the categories, and there's 4.
and each category has its own split.
Each category has its own cost share for it. So every single line item in schedule value, table, some schedule value, has that category assigned to it. It's one of the first things we did in the job. I never proceed, and I think the 3,000 line items in the Excel sheet, something along those lines. We had to go through and make sure we had it coded correctly, we had to review it, send it back. That's why every time you update a schedule on baseline schedules, it's time consuming to go back through and make sure you got your SOE right for the category.
Those align to account codes in our system that then we are tracking up and our accounting teams will have or to then set up the cleaning to Fairfax based on each of those questions. That's the most complicated.
A typical plant job is 64.
Or you're at a pumping station,
So,
it's out something. For an interceptor, depending on the interceptor.
And now Fairfax agrees with those splits.
yeah, so the 60/40 is set by the service agreement of Fairfax. And then there was a memorandum of understanding for the revenue job for the 4 different cost categories in 2019. Maybe 2020, I'm sure, but in 2020. So that was a long process to make sure we had it right, to make sure we could actually implement it in a way that was doable.
I would add you on a monthly basis, with the detailed reconciliation process that goes in place, that's how we feel that like on responsible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they're taking care of the full reports and
Thank you. I wanted all board members to sort of understand it, and I didn't really know it was that. It's a huge complicated problem.
We stick with the easier options versus the more complicated.
But I see the process.
So that's over this in a lot of time.
And what was the figure in front of 3,000 line item?
schedule value. And the schedule value will pay out that we get from the contract. You can go on, there's 3,000 lines. And every single one of the lines is covered.
As a split associated.
It either says category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4, and everybody understands what those are. Goes all the way back to the MOU.
Please summarize it for us. Please.
Yeah.
They took care of
But if
it.
you want to dig into it, you'll find it.
No, I'm good.
Just for my third, they can do it. You should have-
Ever since I've been here, they've had these demonetized certain once, sometimes this one I see. Afterwards as well.
Thank you, very, very great. And I'll keep saying, wow. That's complicated. Yeah, but I got it, thanks, thank you.
The next document, page 23, is a compliance letter that's just issued to the banks, just related to covenants and things of that nature. So this is just something that's done every year. Again, nothing's out of the ordinary. And the final document, which begins on page 24, is the required communications to our governance, so to the board and to the committee. So this is just contains quite a bit of just a lot of it is standard language that is required to include here that has not been, modified to, because there are no issues essentially. So the first item on 25 that is of note a little bit is there was a new accounting standard, which was the ASPE statement number 100. That did not have an impact on the financial statements, but it is noted here that it was implemented. Page 26, beginning on page 26, has a list of accounting estimates. So as is the case with any set of financial statements, there are estimates that are used in the preparation of financial statements and supporting calculations. The key ones are kind of highlighted here, just documents, the policies that surround them, how the estimate is derived, and then how we kind of, audited that estimate. The remaining information here for the next several pages is standard. There's nothing here that is out of the ordinary. The next page, I guess, to jump to, be page 32. This just shows the journal entries that were posted during the audit. So these are just required to be included here. There's a pretty standard, most entries here are pretty standard, just kind of, as the audit progresses, there are, tweaks made, things of that nature by management right to us. There's journal entry for fixed assets, journal entry for the Fairfax allocation that we just discussed. Some journal entries here to record some ARPA requisitions that were submitted after year end, things of that nature. But plenty of information there if anyone wants to look at the journal entries. And then beginning on page 37 is going to be the management letter. So this is to management and then to the board. And it discusses just suggestions to improve internal controls. So these are, as noted in the top section, there's different levels of deficiency. So the material weakness or the significant deficiency, those would be the most severe. There were no instances of that during the audit. So the two that we have listed here are just internal control suggestions for improvement, essentially. And these are the two that Lake kind of already highlighted. The first of which is the accounts receivable reconciliation. It's a recommendation for process improvement. Similar to the past, like you mentioned, there's some older amounts in the receivable reconciliation. We just kind of recommend working with the new billing company to get those resolved, get them, everything back kind of trued up essentially. And as Lake mentioned, they go several years back, so it wasn't something that happened this year or anything like that. And then the other comment, as Lake mentioned, was just related to the scheduled expenditure of federal awards. Just a suggestion to update that, on a regular basis. The original CFA did not include all the federal awards, so it was updated after the audit began a little bit. So, just updating it regularly will help to ensure that if there's new grants that come in, that the compliance requirements are kind of, tracked and in place to make sure that there's no issues with compliance. Like we mentioned, there were no compliance findings or matters to report this year, so there were no compliance issues. Just the best practice going forward to kind of keep the CFA updated during the year. And then the final document there is just the management representation letter. So that's just the letter that management provides to us at the end of the audit to conclude the audit. But that kind of covers the highlights of the audit. We appreciate you all as the board for allowing us to be of service. We appreciate everyone, Lake's team, with their help to get it all done. Like I mentioned, it was a very successful audit. we're always available throughout the year. If you all have questions, if Blake and his team have questions or concerns, we're always happy to help. So, any questions about anything in the audit?
This is where it's not very big, it's on, page 41. I don't put each other reference to the district.
Okay, yes, sir. I will make a note of that one.
Further questions?
If you see improving the control, it's just a recommendation because there are some discrepancies.
I think that just as the comment mentioned, is just like on the accounts receivable, like mentioned, seems to be some older items on the underlying AR report from the previous billing company that were never kind of cleared off. And so as part of working with the new company, look at getting those removed, make it more streamlined process with the AR reconciliation. So
I know over the last year, we moved from a one customer billing system to a new customer billing system. And so what Mr. Tomlinson is right, or it's referencing is that as we moved off of that old billing system, there were some kind of legacy items that we need to show up.
We know what they are.
Yeah.
We just have to look at different sources and best practice is usually one source. That's just the board. I have to go against the laws. Just more for lack of a better term, nice way to do it, just to make it easy for everybody.
Thank you.
That's clear.
Now, once again, on the next slide. So I can say that. So the next step from here is next Tuesday, the Finance and Audit Committee will present the ACFR and the audit to the board. And as that will also present the annual report, newly designed annual report, capital report, proper annual report to the board of directors as well. Questions so far as that concludes this presentation.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. Probably the motion. Finance.
I move that the finance and audit committee approve this audit report and enable to invest it.
That's good. Second.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Much. Congratulations again. Thank you. All your help. And all this time. Maybe you have time up with 3,000 line items.
I think given the timing of the audit, we thought it'd be a good time to brief the finance and audit committee meeting, try to make our meetings a little more standard year over year. And give a budget preview at this meeting as well after we finish the audit. So Ms. Bean's going to walk through our fiscal year 2026 budget preview. This is 10,000 foot level, but it gives you an idea of what we're putting in the budget. As we develop the budget at the same time as we're finishing up last fiscal year with the audit. I didn't say anything else in your presentation.
You don't know. I was gonna actually make a joke that we kind of finish out audit and then start budget and then finish budget, start audit. It's just kind of a continuous cycle. So we'll flip to the next slide. So good evening, Chair, Mr. Board Chair, committee members. So tonight, it follows a similar presentation that was made last year and kind of builds on that to talk about fiscal year 2026. So finishing out 24 with the audit, we're currently in fiscal year 25 and then looking forward to 26 and budgeting. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at what does our annual budget development process look like? What does it look like for the timing of this year when you'll expect to see presentations from staff to the board for the budget? And then a little bit more on what are we seeing potentially for initiatives for fiscal year 2026. So this slide presents our typical budget every year process. This includes consideration for years where we do set rates and when we don't need to set rates, that part of the process is not included. So we start with budget goals, which is kind of where we are right now, figuring out what the initiatives are, what the projects that we need to be working on in the coming years, both this coming year and as we look forward to the 10-year CIP or capital improvement program. That helps us get to a preliminary draft forecast for the budget. And that forecast is put into our rate model. And we work with our rate consultants to develop rate options on rate setting years, with rate options for how much we would need to increase rates and bring those to the board for consideration and approval. But once we get to rate options, we're really putting together a preliminary draft budget that is considered by the board, leads to a draft budget where we present it publicly at a public hearing, and then ultimately that budget is adopted by the board. So what that looks like for this year, what you will see in the coming months, really starting in March, but tonight we're making a presentation on what we anticipate seeing based on October of what you'll see in the budget in fiscal year 2026. At the March 11th Finance and Audit Committee meeting, we'll bring to the board the preliminary draft budget as well as rate recommendations for consideration. The Finance and Audit Committee will present that preliminary draft budget and the rate recommendations to the board for consideration. There's time allowed for the board's consideration so that at the April meeting, the board would adopt the draft budget and rate recommendations for public hearing or public hearing. And then in May 17th, we're currently anticipating a public hearing where we would present on a Saturday morning the draft budget and rate recommendations publicly. Assuming this all moves along, that budget and rate recommendation would be approved in June at the June board meeting for the budget and rates to become effective July 1st. Right now, as we're currently working across departments to develop an operating and capital budgets, what we're currently seeing and would be factored into the preliminary draft budget that you'll see are starting with, this is basically broken down into expenses and revenues, operating, debt service, and capital. So on the operating side, we're seeing addition of staff really focused around improving our monitoring of our processes, adding in someone to help us manage the asset management program that we just launched. A technical trainer that's really focused on helping improve our training of our staff, and then service workers to support our maintenance team. We anticipate right now a performance-based merit and awards increase of about 5%. On debt service side, we are seeing an uptick in the amount of debt service that we need to pay off based on revenue and then the addition of the 2024 green bonds. So we'll see approximately 20 million in debt service as we pay down existing debt and this addition of new debt. And then on the capital side, we are anticipating about 100 million for river renew, and then 50 million of spending for the solids upgrade program, preliminary and primary systems upgrade project, and the tertiary systems upgrade project. On the revenue side, we are anticipating a rate increase of between 5% and 6%. We'll show that on upcoming slide. And this is really still focused on supporting river renew. Because we did see an increase in interest income. We're just noting that we likely see a bump up on the debt service side of interest income for both debt service and then capital. And then finally, just an estimated 30 million from Fairfax County contribution to account for our three major projects. This slide highlights the four capital projects that we're really focused in on for fiscal year 2026 and what we anticipate the activities will be for the upcoming year. So starting with the solids upgrade program, the board has been seeing some of the amendments come forward. We anticipate really progression of design, finalizing and design and starting construction on the short-term upgrades for solids, and then progressing design for medium-term upgrades, which is associated with the drying facility. For the preliminary and primary systems upgrade, we will be finalizing design and starting construction associated with the primary rear observation house, primary settling tanks, and sludge pumps. On the tertiary systems upgrade project, we still need to procure the design builder. We anticipate that procurement will be happening starting in early starting in early 2025 and moving throughout the year in order to bring a design builder on. And that we would we'd execute the contract and begin planning and design for that project in fiscal year 2026. And then finally on River Renew, we're really starting to see kind of that project getting closer and closer to its end with completing the pump stations, finalizing construction at the outfall sites, and then conducting operational demonstration for the system in fiscal year 2026. This slide is a start to looking at what our 10-year capital improvement program looks like. It's a combination of the numbers that were presented in the fiscal year 2025 budget with some additional updated cash flows or projections for the solids upgrade program and the preliminary and primary systems upgrade project. So you can see right now in fiscal year 2025, there's still a lot of work around River Renew, so a lot more money is being spent on the Alex only side. But as we start to pick up work for the three major projects, solids, PPSU, and tertiary, you start to see more split between Fairfax County and Alex Renew because most of that work is on the plant side, and so it has a 60-40 split. We are noting that we do anticipate some additional need for funding. We are not saying it is a bond sale. It could be depending on what the market indicates at that time and where loan programs are when we get to about fiscal year 2027. This is really built on previous slides where we presented the debt service and adds in that additional debt that we anticipate needing for these three main projects, as well as the total of our 10-year CIP. It's a lot of debt that's being added. Obviously, I think that this is still a work in progress as we're working with our rate consultants and determining how much debt really is the right amount of debt to take on from looking at our cash reserves and our anticipated 10-year CIP. This again is really, it also is a note that it does not include future yet to be determined capital projects. So there may be capital projects in the future that require additional debt. And then finally, this year, we will be setting, so we're coming off of a 2-year rate increase. This year, we will be making a recommendation to the board for rate increases. Right now, based on rate increases over the last several years, there's been basically back when we started the review program, board determined that a 2-year rate increase cycle was best for kind of where we were with the program. This is the last anticipated 2-year rate increase associated with River Renew. And so you can see the rate increases that have been over the last several years. And then right now, these rate increases are based on what was presented in the fiscal year 2025 budget process. So there might be slight tweaks, but it gives you kind of a ballpark number for where we're seeing rates. rate increases in the EFG to support revenue for the next 2 years. Yes.
I just said.
Caitlin, thank you. And I think it's great to have this discussion now. We go back to the, slide with the 10-year capital improvements program. Okay. There's a lot going on in this one. We're just coming off of River Renew, which when we were building it, we thought it was the biggest project we'd ever seen. And looking into 27 and 28, going, well, there are bigger ones on the horizon. That's what this chart is telling us, right? Now, the bar on the left, 2025. Most of that capital expense is in the renew. But now you go to 27 and 28. Most of that is the 4 new projects, right? And so in the fiscal environment we're living in now is different. Won't be any ARPA program. Who knows what's going on with these loan programs? We can go into this with our eyes wide open. And we have to do this. We have to do this.
Straight same like this. But where they are.
Who knows?
Stretching the plate. Also, ifs and none of them like that.
Just thinking of our ratepayers. Right? They thought things would level out after. And we're seeing finances, we're seeing rate increases 5% a year, of course, as far as the eye can see.
I think the important, at least a point to make on this slide is just the flip with River Renew, how much was primarily funded by our ratepayers to execute River Renew, and how these projects will be financed in a different way. There isn't some special cost share. This is the 60-40 split, which is a different. It's not to say that this isn't possible. It is. These projects are major and we need to do them, but there's a different split or set of share.
Put the numbers out there. River Renew is $615 million, Fairfax paid $58 million. This is not that.
As I recall, when we looked at the sulfur program, the bus estimate once ago, 3 or 4 years, was very close. What is this to county drive? Are you taking an average of distance, or are you taking?
We're taking the cost estimate that we received from the contractor and adding it into what we showed the board last year for the remainder of the 10-year CIP.
I think we learned anything from River Renew. The execution rate is not going to happen over two years like it's shown here, but that's what the cash flow shows that way from the contract. It's highly unlikely that we're going to spend at that rate for those 2 years. It likely be spread out over 4. That's what we, based on what we just went through, those peak years of spending with River Renew kind of got, spread out over 3 to 4 years. Right now, the peak spending we're showing in FY 27, 28. That likely will be spread out over 4 years, because we just can't execute at the rate that we project on a piece of paper.
We're into the same place that the state, the same peak. So it was longer.
Right. Correct.
Which I think we have the advantage of we didn't go out and finance the entirety of the program like we did with River Renew. We were intentional about starting with getting some initial funding through bonds, and that this doesn't have to stay here depending on how we see this spending really shake out. we can move it out so that we're not taking on debt prematurely.
think the schedule will help show the.
I mean, we did, Dr. Juan, I think we used the contractors. This is developed based on, every year we get a schedule and a spend from our contractors and designers of how much they're gonna spend on that, and we're gonna use that to develop the 10-year CIP. I think what we found is designers and engineers and contractors are really ambitious, and when they put an aggressive CIP cash flow together for the program, and it results in these like, spikes. But we do update that every year, and that's why I see the revenue spending trailing what we have on our cash flow curve. Because we're really ambitious for a year and a half out.
But it just for the board, they have a skill that basically short term spend over time. It's like you will not have this big spike.
Yeah, I don't think that will happen. Hopefully, we get more power definition will spread out.
And design the debt service, customize the debt service. Smooth it out. Say how many years, how do you want to go? And but either way, it's a slope up, it's a slope up, it's steady. Which is, in my mind, leads to just getting to think as to how we get stakeholders as to not necessarily initially the numbers, but just what's the reason for the projects that we can pick up why.
And one of these projects, I think, to go back to your point, I don't think any of these projects are new. They've always been there. You know, they're just kind of put aside for 7 years while there's a new backhoe, which can't do anything.
That's part of
That's part of
the mess. That's part of the.
It's just part that they're coming into a little more definition now as we start.
Well, I know the projects were always there, but now we have numbers associated. And that's gotten more solid. Right.
It's very good downside if they do it, but it's a risk if you do it. So,
Let me just ask you a question. I don't mean this. Or maybe, is there any value in looking at sequencing the 4 big projects?
we have to do them all so close together.
Is there any fiscal benefit to spreading them out, or have they been postponed on and we have to get to?
So solid. Tertiary. Tertiary should have been done in 2018. Solids. Given what I experienced when I started here, needed to be done or started, we should have a short term for them done already. That should have been done. And I think the PPSC project was already under design, 6 years ago. And, we're dealing with pumps from 1970. So I think we're at the end of useful life on a lot of this stuff. It needs a breath of fresh air to keep us reliable. Otherwise, you're spending the money on O&M and chasing after fixing things, which is where we are now.
It's not being brought.
So very reactive organization. But I guess the short answer is all of that. But my gut tells me the drying facility for solids is going to spread out more than what we're showing in FY 25. It's a big spending.
Yeah, the nature of projects. We do have an education challenge. But I do think some of the ratepayers were hoping that once River Renewal's done, things will stay probably below the rate of inflation.
We'll put a projection together. Take a look at it. See what they're doing.
With that, it might be just do some, and I just don't say that. Well, the timing was a little different. We have structural inflation, it's a little bit more, so kind of that's better. it's really nice and the number is going to be fans of, a lot of numbers, high and low, it's like somewhere in there with all the things that come at us and all of the added pressures beyond this, the exception, probably the exception of the time.
And, to your point, the Fairfax portion is different, but in your chart, the sky blue bars are as big in 28 as they are in 25, right? And that's really our portion. Big picture. Well aware that we have been postponing a lot of things. But here, we see it, the price tag attached. Very good presentation.
And you can see what we're not catching in the 5 years after the 5 years we're now. We're not good at projecting beyond 5 years. You can see that in the way, like what's not shown on there is, HVAC upgrades and then somewhere there's electrical upgrades for the whole facility. We don't know what those cost right now, so we're carrying plug numbers for the out year.
It's under here too.
Some for the design, and then as that design progresses, we kind of get an idea of what they have. So there's probably $80–90 million of work in there for HVAC and electrical. Big deal. But I would expect that curve to be flat. If the spending's happening. I see it with the way that it's burned, it might just. Spread out a bit more, but what you're saying there, that sharp. A little ambitious. Contractors. Cash flow. 5% design.
Cost estimates were 5%. So
Cost estimates are what we're seeing. I mean, this first cost estimate for solid payment and other range. Preview for Tucson. That's good sign. So chop 10 million off. Or move it somewhere.
So we're going to just a little bit.
Well, it's just getting close to the right. Yes. But there's good news that we're saying coming out, some of the cost estimates are very conservative, given the procurement model and the risk of the contractor putting out a number and then it being lower than what it actually is. So we're seeing them kind of hedge towards the high side on the scene. Early on. At least with the first amendment. $15 million engineer estimates coming in at 5 million. That's great.
it's going to be a bunch of crazy. You just do presentation.
Big corrector, yeah. That was funny. She's really quiet. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That completes issues on the agenda this evening. Probably. That will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second. Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. See you next week.
I know.
We have the financial. I just want to